Hello and welcome to our first virtual Fellows Colloquium on Halloween Eve. Since this is a live session, your mic and your camera and the chat functions have been disabled, but you can ask questions using the Q&A function anytime. And Dr. Harris will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. I think you know already that this session is being recorded, and we hope to make it available in about a week's time. And once it's captioned. So look for that. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Richard D. Green Dean of the College of Natural Sciences and Mathematics, Dr. Kurt Bennett.
Hello, and welcome to the Fall Fellows Colloquium. This is not our typical Fellows Colloquium format. Like many of you, I look forward to our biannual events as an opportunity to connect with alumni, faculty, and donors in person. It is a shame that we are not able to be together in person tonight, but fortunately, there is a silver lining. Tonight, we have the pleasure of connecting with alumni from all across the country, not just the ones that live close enough to make it back to campus. And I am so glad that all of you are here right now. I want to take this time to thank all of our fellow members in the audience tonight. Our fellows members provide us with support all year long that allows our college to thrive, especially now with the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Your support is much appreciated and being put to very good use. As many of you know, instruction operations at CSULB are mostly virtual this semester and are likely going to remain so for the remainder of the 2020-21 academic year. And while the College of Natural Sciences and Mathematics has very few face-to-face classes, a lot of our research is ongoing. Your help provides wonderful and rich opportunities for students to work with our outstanding faculty, like tonight's speaker, Dr. Mike Harris. Here in the College of Natural Sciences and Mathematics, we pride ourselves on doing public science for public good. Research groups at the beach are engaged in applying new technologies and approaches to address modern challenges and questions spanning a wide variety of topics, like marine pollution, therapeutic strategies in medicine, global climate changes, discovering how the universe works, understanding tectonics and geology, and of course, how we might keep ourselves safe from zombies. You're in for a real treat tonight with this presentation from Mike. There's no better time for it than the night before Halloween. So with that, I will hand it over to the Chair of Biological Sciences Department, Dr. Desi Underwood.
Myself. Okay, am I good to go? Yes? Okay, good evening. My name is Desi Underwood. I currently serve as the chair of the Department of Biological Sciences at Cal State Long Beach. The Department of Biological Sciences is one of 6 departments within the College of Natural Sciences. We are a dynamic student-centered department that engages over 1,400 undergraduate students and 60 graduate students. During this pandemic, our faculty continued to invest in training the next generation of biologists by establishing safe research protocols in their labs that enabled students to come to campus to participate in hands-on research. And moreover, faculty engaged over the summer in trainings in pedagogy to offer exceptional online instruction this semester and next semester. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Michael Harris. Mike earned his BS in 1990, his MS in 92, a PhD in 97, all in zoology from the University of British Columbia. In 2003, he joined the faculty at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, in the Department of Biology and Wildlife, and was promoted to full professor in 2015. He taught veterinary physiology, and neurobiology. In 2016, he joined CSULB as an assistant professor in the Department of Biological Sciences and was granted tenure this year in 2020. He teaches human mammalian physiology and maintains a research lab in physiology. Beyond typical academic pursuits, Mike often applies biological principles to understand or speculate on a field that's known as cryptophysiology, the physiology of mythical creatures. Mike has taken many opportunities to debate questions such as the horse versus human lungs in centaurs, the possibility of giant man-eating insects, whether the Miss Fizzle and the magical school bus could actually shrink small enough to travel within the human body, and the flight capabilities of the average Pegasus. It is in this spirit that he has taken to consider the physiology of zombies. What began as a series of analogies useful in classroom teaching seeded an invitation to join the advisory board of the Zombie Research Society, and has led to scientific consultation with screenwriters and graphic novelists and public presentations such as tonight. After the presentation, I will co-host a Zoom chat where participants can socialize. The link will be posted in the chat and was already sent out to you previously. I hope you can join us. And now here's Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, Desi. I'm going to share my screen for the slides. And yes, today I am going to present on the topic of the physiology of the undead. The general understanding here is better the zombie you know than the zombie you don't. Better to be informed today than and alive tomorrow. There are certainly some advantages to understanding the physiological basis of the zombie state, and there's benefits to understanding these things well in advance of the zombie apocalypse or before the zombies start to breach the laboratory door. What I'm going to give you is a brief summary of some of the research done in the Afterlife Sciences program here at Cal State Long Beach. As an aside, I am currently recruiting laboratory assistants to fill an unexpected vacancy in our research program. If anyone wants to discuss the opportunities in the chat after the seminar, I will be here. So in today's seminar, I'd like to talk about a couple of things about zombie physiology. First off, the methods by which you might see a human to zombie transition. This is a theory I refer to as the amygdala hijack hypothesis, and I'll go into some depth talking about that. I'd like to address some simple controversies in zombie physiology, the discrepancy between whether zombies are slow moving or fast moving. I'd like to describe the rationale behind the compulsion for eating of brains of the zombies. I would like to address the capacity of zombies' strength and endurance, and then end with some practical applications, insights for personal and civil defense in the concept of the coming apocalypse. Many have asked why I study zombie physiology. I'd like to preface this whole presentation by saying that I don't believe in the supernatural. This is not a situation of articulated skeletons rising from the earth. That's not possible, but I do understand that we might not always have a complete understanding of what comprises the natural world. And it's certainly worth investigating potential natural causes for physiology such as what we'd find with zombies. So if we do discount the supernatural, what we're left with are natural processes, and we can approach this with some simple premises. First off, the physiology of the zombie has to be derived from the physiology of the human from which the zombie has spawned. What follows from that is that the zombies must also comply with biological principles, chemical laws, physical laws. Zombies cannot be dead. Zombies have to be alive. And if they're alive, the biological principles underlying life have to still hold true. One of which is that zombies must have a metabolism and meet those metabolic needs. So when we think about the human to zombie transition, we have to consider the nature of infection. Now, the nature of zombie infection isn't well understood. It can be modeled in parallel to what we do know about infections from other viruses such as rabies. In this illustration, we see that a rabies infection starts with a bite, very much like a zombie infection would start. The virus underlying rabies and then potentially underlying zombification would multiply in the tissues surrounding the bite, would travel within the nerves from those muscles, up the peripheral nervous system, moving into the central nervous system, and then up into the brain. The virus infects the brain, reproduces in the brain, alters brain function, and then finds its way into the salivary glands and other organs, allowing the newly infected zombie to again infect another host. So we have the same circumstance with a zombie virus that's transmitted by a bite, infecting tissues, slowly moving into the central nervous system and changing the physiology and the behavior of the infected host, the human that becomes the zombie. Now, to understand how this might happen, I get to bring in what is now kind of a dated concept, the idea of the triune brain, first presented by Dr. Paul MacLean in 1970. What MacLean suggested was, if you consider the human brain, it has three distinct parts. It has what he referred to as the reptilian brain. That could be the brainstem and portions of the midbrain. And the responsibility of those structures is basic body homeostasis. These are the brain structures that keep the lights on. These are the ones that are responsible for regulation of blood pressure and breathing and heart rate, and basically keeping the body itself alive. Above that is what MacLean referred to as the paleomammalian or the limbic system. We still use the term limbic system. It's more of the emotional brain. It's one level above just simple homeostasis, but it's not truly a mammalian nervous system. Sitting above all of this in the mammalian nervous system, especially the human mammalian nervous system, is what MacLean referred to as the neomammalian brain, or the cortex. Cortex has oversight and regulation over all of the underlying regions of the brain. So if we consider this triune model, we can see that the neomammalian brain has control and oversight over the paleomammalian brain, and the paleomammalian brain overlays the reptilian brain. Well, the amygdala hijack hypothesis is basically saying that this middle layer, right, the middle of the triune brain, takes over control and interrupts the oversight that's being overlaid over the system from the true mammalian brain. So the limbic system is the major component of this middle portion of the brain. And what we see with the amygdala hijack hypothesis is that, like states of stress response, states of high sympathetic activation, the fight or flight reflex, we see that the limbic system becomes hyperactive and takes control over the entire central nervous system. This exaggerates the stress response. It leads to excitation of the sympathetic nervous system and all the things the sympathetic nervous system does. Importantly, the limbic system hyperactivity uncouples areas of the cortex that are responsible for oversight, for executive function, specifically the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is important as a gatekeeper and important to control impulses and control emotions. In the absence of prefrontal cortex regulation, you get a number of physiological states. You have the extinction of fear. You lose the elements that are performed by the prefrontal cortex. You lose empathy. You lose impulse control. You lose pain perception. You lose the ability to regulate emotions. You lose logical decision-making, and you lose the ability to plan. And this can happen very quickly. The limbic system can respond within seconds and can uncouple the prefrontal cortex, leading to all of these physiological and behavioral changes. As part of the amygdala hijack hypothesis, the different components of the limbic system can also uncouple. So the primary element of the limbic system, the amygdala, overrides other limbic functions. So the basal ganglia is an element of the limbic system, and it can be uncoupled and disrupted by hyperactivity of the amygdala, leading to the exaggeration of habitual behaviors, leading to movement disorders, postural rigidity, a loss of fine motor control, and loss of what's called emotional memory. The idea that memory of past emotions influences current perceptions. All of those are the responsibilities of the basal ganglia, and if the amygdala overrides the basal ganglia, the result is a loss of those basal ganglia functions. In addition, the amygdala can override other limbic structures within the thalamus. Thalamus is a gatekeeper of other stimuli. The thalamus mediates hunger, so you could have an increase in hunger. The thalamus prevents the overexpression of sensory inputs. It actually allows you to ignore sensory inputs. Without the thalamic influences, you have a loss of that sensory gating, leading to a hypersensitivity or a hyperreaction to sensory stimuli, a hyperresponsiveness to those stimuli, and an increase in the perception of threat. All of those things are tempered by the thalamus. In the absence of the thalamic influence, all of those things would be upregulated. And then also with the hypothalamus, another element of the limbic system, that's also overlain by the amygdala. Hypothalamus limits hunger, so you would see an increase in hunger. It would lead to a decrease in sensitivity of satiation, that sense of fullness. It decreases the ability to perceive fatigue. It interrupts the transitions between sleep and wakefulness, interrupting sleep. Reduces the control system for body temperature. The temperature set point resides within the hypothalamus, and also reduces the release of various thyroid hormones, leads to thyroid deactivation. All of these can have profound physiological consequences, and the reduction in temperature and the thyroid deactivation I will be coming back to. So we have a situation where a virus can move within the peripheral and central nervous system, can uncouple the limbic system from the prefrontal cortex and lead to profound behavioral change. One of the questions associated with understanding the behavior and physiology of zombies is this idea of whether or not zombies can be fast or slow. Simple answer to this question of are zombies fast and slow is yes. Zombies are fast or slow. This is going to depend on the nature of physical damage of the zombie. One can imagine that a zombie that has physical damage to the limbs might not be able to ambulate as well. It might relate to the age or the degree of degeneration associated with a zombie, how long the zombie has been within the zombie state. And it also can relate to the physiological capacities of the zombie, which is a feature that I'd like to discuss. Another feature of zombies is trying to understand the popular representation of a compulsion to eat brains. To understand a zombie's compulsion to eat brains, we need to understand a little bit about the nutritional physiology of zombies. So like humans, zombies have to eat. They have to take in fuel that provides energy. If we look at the food requirements of a zombie, it's well understood. Here we see a zombie food pyramid, where we can see a nice balanced diet for the zombie, includes some bones, some intestine, a little bit of liver, but predominantly it's brains. Brains are the predominant food of the zombie. We can ask a question, why is it that brains are the preferred and predominant source of nutrition? Well, if we look at the nutritional content of brains, we can see that brains as a dietary element are very rich in fat, very low carbohydrate, low sugar, and very high in protein. So we can see that brains, the preferred food, are a very large contributor to dietary intake of fat. We can presume then that zombies prefer a high-fat diet and can work their metabolic requirements on the basis of using fat as a dietary fuel. Now, understanding which fuel the zombies prefer, brains, is one thing. Understanding why they seem to crave brains constantly can be explained by looking at the nature of appetite balance. So the balance of appetite is based on hormones, primarily the counterbalance of the hormone ghrelin and the hormone leptin. Leptin is an appetite suppressor, ghrelin is an appetite stimulator. Now again, with the amygdala hijack hypothesis, increase in hunger could be because of an exaggeration of the ghrelin response. Ghrelin comes from the stomach, influences the limbic system, enhancing the compulsion to eat. Now, satiation, that feeling of fullness, comes from a different hormone. This is a hormone that's called leptin. Now, leptin is released by fat cells, adipose cells. It may be that the compulsion to eat brains is that to eat high fat tissue like brains allows the zombie to consume an awful lot of fat cells, that producing a high level of leptin. It may be that normal leptin production in the zombies is very low. They don't feel that sense of satiation or fullness, and they crave the consumption of brains for the high fat and the leptin that's contained within those fat cells. As they take in the fat cells, they take in the leptin, and then finally they can feel full from the enhanced leptin coming from the fat cells. In addition, we need to understand what else we can find in the brain. Although the brain has a large proportion of fat, the brain is also a very rich source in neurotransmitters, the chemical signaling molecules within the brain, and especially the neurotransmitter glutamate. Glutamate structurally is very similar to the structure of monosodium glutamate, glutamate with a single sodium attached to the molecule. Monosodium glutamate is MSG. MSG is an appetite enhancer, and it's also the source of the umami flavor palette. Could very well be that the glutamate within the brains that are being consumed by the zombie are specifically stimulating to the tongue via the umami flavor pathway. So the molecular structure of the glutamate molecule is very similar to the monosodium glutamate, leading to the compulsion again to eat brains from the zombie's perspective. So based on this preferred diet, we can presume that the zombies are craving, are compelled, are consuming a high-fat diet. We can then presume that they're using that fat as a metabolic fuel, a fuel for their metabolism. And in general, metabolism is a source of fuel, a source of oxygen, and they use the fuel and the oxygen to produce energy necessary for the function of biological processes. So we can consider what are the actual metabolic requirements of a typical zombie and how are they different from the initial human. Well, again, we go back to the amygdala hijack hypothesis. The amygdala overrides the hypothalamus, and as I said earlier, reduces the set point for body temperature regulation, reducing body temperature, and also leads to thyroid deactivation. Thyroid hormone and body temperature are both strong influences on the rate of metabolism, metabolic rate. So the rate of metabolism dictates the amount of energy required by the organism. And if a zombie has a lower temperature because of a reduction in the temperature set point and a reduction in deactivation of metabolic rate by thyroid deactivation, we have a lower metabolic requirement. Now, we've not measured the metabolic requirement of a typical zombie, but we can presume that if an organism the size of a human reduces its need to maintain a human body temperature and becomes cold-blooded or ectothermic, and has a physiology that's less driven by thyroid hormone, that organism would closely resemble the metabolic profile of a cold-blooded animal like a reptile. So this is a figure that talks about the metabolic requirements of animals of different sizes, comparing warm-blooded animals shown in red and black and cold-blooded animals shown in green. The ectotherms in green, the endotherms in red and black. If the amygdala hijack hypothesis leads to an abandonment of warm-bloodedness and leads to a downregulation of thyroid-driven metabolism, then we can presume that the metabolic rates of the zombie are similar to the metabolic rates of an animal the size of a human, but with the metabolism of a reptile. The daily energy requirements of a mammal, because they have to maintain warm-bloodedness and the degree of growth and tissue turnover typical of a mammal, are 20 times higher than the metabolic requirements of a reptile. So if we have a situation through the amygdala hijack hypothesis of a mammal reducing its metabolic requirements to match those of a reptile, we would say that a transition to the zombie state would come with a 20 times reduction in the requirement for metabolic fuel and also for metabolic processes. We can consider the zombie to be similar to an equal-sized reptile. Well, keeping in mind that the zombie is derived from a host human and has the physiological characteristics of a host human. Physiological characteristics of the host human are in place to match the metabolic requirements of the host human, most notably the heart, the cardiovascular system, the blood, and the lungs. And we can compare lung structure and lung function between reptiles and mammals. Reptiles have a very distinctive lung structure. It's called a chimeral lung, shown here on the left-hand side. A chimeral lung, chimeral means chambered. And a reptilian lung has a series of many relatively large chambers. And those chambers provide a surface area for the exchange of gases between the air in the lungs and the blood flowing through that tissue. If we compare the chimeral lung of reptiles to a mammalian lung, which is a very different structure. The mammalian lung has an alveolar structure. It's made of alveoli, which are much, much smaller in size. And there are many more of them. So a mammalian alveolar lung, for the same size lung in the same sized organism, the alveolar lung of a mammal has approximately 85% increase in surface area per unit weight of lungs. So the capacity for exchange of gases in the mammalian lung is much higher than the capacity for the exchange of gases found in a reptilial chimeral lung. So we have the increased capacity for gas exchange in the mammalian alveolar structure. Similar to the increased capacity of the lungs, we can see an increased capacity of the mammalian cardiovascular system. If we compare the cardiovascular system, the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood of reptiles and mammals, we see some distinct differences. Reptiles have a three-chambered septated heart. We have two atria, generally a semi-divided ventricle. This allows for relatively efficient pumping of blood from the reptilian lung to the body and then returning. There is some mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated lung because of the septated ventricle. There's also an inability to separate blood pressures between the blood flow that's going to the lungs and the blood flow that's going to the rest of the body. In contrast, mammalian hearts are four-chambered, two atria and two ventricles. The left and the right heart are completely separated. So that completely separates the flow of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. There's no mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. There's also the ability to separate blood pressure between the circulation that goes to the lungs, has a lower pressure, and the circulation that goes to the body and has a higher pressure. This difference in the chambered structure between the reptilian and the mammalian heart separates oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, separates blood pressure, and the increased efficiency of a separated heart with separated oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood, separated blood pressure, allows for greater cardiovascular capacity in the cardiovascular system of the mammals. The mammalian four-chambered heart allows for increased blood flow, increased blood pressure, and more efficient delivery of oxygen to the tissues requiring that oxygen. Now, if we consider if the metabolism of a mammal is converted to the metabolic demand of a reptile during the conversion of human to zombie, yet that zombie is equipped with a high-efficiency lung and a high-efficiency heart, then the resulting capacities of the low-temperature, low-metabolic demand reptile are much greater than the demands for those systems to meet metabolic requirements. You have over-endowed the zombie with a cardiovascular system and a respiratory system that's greater than its normal needs. Metabolically speaking, then, we can consider that we've converted the warm-blooded mammal to an equal-sized, cold-blooded reptile. Metabolically, a zombie could be considered as a human-sized reptile. And we have examples of human-sized predatory reptiles that have extreme predatory capabilities. And there certainly has never been any documented downside about humans interacting with human-sized predatory reptiles that have those capacities. So if we consider that zombies might very well be behaving and have the capacities of human-sized predatory reptiles, that poses one problem. But we can also consider that the zombie comes from a host human with the capacities of a host human, and this could make things very much worse than just simply having a human-sized predatory reptile to deal with. Now recall that mammals have 20 times the energy requirement of a similarly sized reptile. So mammals have a heart and lungs and blood vessels and blood that have the capacity to meet the metabolic requirements that are 20 times greater than the requirements of the zombie. Mammals can accommodate this very high energy demand with this four-chambered heart, with this alveolar structured lung, with the blood supply with different blood pressures between the left and the right heart. These physiological systems do provide 20 times the resources that would be needed by the resulting zombie if the metabolic demands of the zombie are reduced by a 20-fold decrease, as would be expected from a change in thyroid hormone status and a change in body temperature. Now, just to give this some perspective, the difference between, say, me and a Tour de France cyclist is a very small increase in the capacities of the competitive cyclist's heart and lungs. Competitive cyclists tend to have larger hearts, slightly larger blood volumes, slightly larger lungs, and their performance is greatly enhanced by having perhaps a 5% increase in cardiovascular capacity or lung capacity. A very small change makes all the difference in the world between a recreational cyclist and a world-class competitive cyclist. So if we consider that the zombies have hearts and lungs that were present in the original human, but only 5% of the metabolic requirements, we consider that then the zombie is provided with the human heart and the human lungs that have capacities that are 20 times greater than those required for their metabolism. If the Tour de France cyclist has a 5% advantage in cardiovascular capacity, in lung capacity from a standard human, what do you think the performance advantage would be given a zombie's lower metabolic requirements, but high capacities for their cardiovascular system and their lung system? You have a recipe for a high-performance predatory zombie. You have high capacities for exercise, high capacity for muscle performance. Or what we have is a zombie that can withstand or sustain profound damage to the cardiovascular system or the respiratory system. If the zombie only requires 5% of the lungs and the cardiovascular system, the heart and the blood vessels that are present in the human, then you can reduce the human's lungs and cardiovascular system by 95% before we even interrupt the metabolic needs of the zombie, allowing the zombie to sustain a great deal of physical damage given the higher capacity the zombie is provided with. Now, this leads to the final stage of the presentation, practical applications and insights for personal and civil defense, and the topic of the research program described here in this picture. Here we're investigating the effectiveness of torso attacks on the zombie, considering that a zombie has 5% need for the existing heart, 5% need for the existing lungs, You have overcapacity in the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system. So the individual zombie can sustain a great deal of damage. What we're learning from this study is that attacks of the torso for the zombie are relatively futile. The zombie is very good at withstanding those things. What we know from the brain-mediated elements of zombie physiology is the zombies are still dependent on brain function, but are less dependent on respiratory and cardiovascular function. In essence, then, an attack of the torso is futile. The bottom line from all of this is, as we know from public media, to kill a zombie, you need to go for the head. Going for the body is useless. This comes to the end of the presentation. I would like to thank very much George Romero, the documentary filmmaker who is responsible for popularizing the zombie theme and the zombie characteristics. Basically, thank you, George, for getting the whole thing started. I'd like to wish you, the audience, a happy Halloween. Thank you very much for coming, and I would be delighted to address any questions you have.
Thank you, Mike. So I am going to do the moderation of the Q&A, and right now there are no questions. So what are some, if the participants would like to post some questions in the Q&A, they could do that right now, and then we can get them answered. I guess in the meantime, while we're waiting for people to ask questions, can you give us a little history about how you got involved with this sort of topic?
So I got involved in this topic in kind of an interesting way. As a teacher in physiology, I was always looking for ways to exemplify the physiological processes. And at the time I was teaching in a program with a traditional strength in wildlife biology. Typically in physiological instruction, you use case-based instruction. You talk about biomedical scenarios where a patient arrives in the emergency room with the following symptoms and what can we find out. And those kind of analogies actually fall kind of flat to a student body that has more interest in ecology and evolution and wildlife biology and very little interest in biomedical physiology. So I happened to think about, well, you know, some people like sick people, some people like comparative physiology, but everybody likes zombies. So I started to talk about the physiological concepts in the context of what we do know from popular fiction for things like zombies. And one of my students nominated me to the advisory board for the Zombie Research Society, which is a real thing. It's a group of basically creative types, screenwriters, cartoonists, comic book artists, as well as scientists. And the interaction within the Zombie Research Society is really designed to try and make the portrayal of zombies more realistic. And it's a whole lot of fun. I've within that group have consulted with a number of creative types, with comic book design, with graphic art design, involved in some science fiction conventions. And it's been a really interesting way to bring sound physiological knowledge into an accessible format in the classroom, but also into the general public as an outreach tool. So this is where it's all really come from.
Excellent. So we have a number of questions now. Here's one from Dr. Bruslin, one of our faculty in genetics and plant biology. She wants to know whether zombies feel pain.
The idea with amygdala override is no, that they don't. In popular perception or in popular media, they're never presented as feeling pain. Pain is a complex sensation, and it requires higher cortical function. In the absence of a prefrontal cortex, the ability to integrate impulses from pain receptors would be lost. So one of the ideas is that no, zombies wouldn't feel pain.
Excellent. Here's one from our general audience. Do zombies prefer eating brains from a living person or from another zombie? Are there nutritional differences between the two?
I would expect, yes, there would be, because zombies aren't really depicted as preying on other zombies. I think that what would happen is the fresh tissue of a fresh human would have higher concentrations of neurotransmitter and would have a fully intact cortex, which is where most of those neurotransmitters are present, also where the fat content is highest. If the zombie uncouples this cortical function, the cortex would start to atrophy. It would lose its high concentrations of fat, high concentrations of neurotransmitter, and wouldn't satisfy the nutritional or taste-based compulsions of the zombie.
Excellent. Oh my gosh, we should see all these questions. This is amazing. Okay, let's see. Oh my gosh, I get to choose. Are zombies conscious?
I would say that yes, they are. If you're considering consciousness as awareness, if you are considering consciousness as the ability of cognitive thought and reflection, then probably not, because those are what are called higher executive functions that are coming from the cortex. So conscious in the sense that the brain stem and the midbrain is responsive to stimuli and reactive, perhaps even self-aware. Yes. In terms of the ability to compose poetry, not so much.
Excellent, excellent. This is fun. I'm glad we're all getting educated on this. So let's see. They're all just coming in all over the place. This is crazy. Wait, I did that one. Sorry, guys. So is there a natural state that you could that's out there actually that resembles the zombie state?
I would say traumatic brain injury would be a close one, where you've have an interruption in impulse control, an exaggeration of sensory responsiveness, very strong reflexes. And if you could consider the features that are generally associated with traumatic brain injury, PTSD, and sociopathy, that would be the closest thing I could think of.
Can other mammals become zombies, not just humans?
Potentially, yes. So the structure of the mammalian brain is similar between species. The primates have very complex cortices. So the reduction in cortical influences in a slightly less complex organism might be less notable, but the cortex does provide impulse control and planning and awareness in many mammalian systems. And the absence of those things would give you the zombie state. The question would be, would those other species be impacted by the virus or the bacteria or whatever vector of infection? And we just don't know.
Gotcha. Actually, somebody asked about if the zombie thing is virus, that's one thing, but what if it's a prion? How would that impact the transmission?
That would be fascinating. So the idea of prion function, the prions are proteins, and the influence adjacent proteins to change their shape. Protein shape influences protein function. So the prion has the ability to alter existing proteins and alter their function without changing the genetics, without having to grow new cells. So prion infection is actually quite possible in this scenario, and would be much more difficult because prions are very difficult to combat with therapeutics.
Okay, and here's one that's come in a couple different ways. What is your favorite depiction of a zombie in movies or TV, or what is the most accurate portrayal? I'm assuming that would be similar.
So this actually gets to the controversy of fast zombies versus slow zombies. The classical portrayal of a zombie from Romero's early work is the Night of the Living Dead zombie that's walking slowly and has movement defects, looks very much asleep. And then that contrasts to the more modern depictions of rage zombies, like from 28 Days Later or World War Z. It could very well be that is just a factor of zombie age, and a newly morphed zombie would have the behavioral characteristics of a World War Z 28 days later type rage zombie, but with time and degradation, you have a lower performance characteristic developing and you get the slow moving zombies. I much prefer the original George Romero depictions of zombies. Those are the depictions that I certainly cut my teeth on, and that is the classical canon as far as I'm concerned.
So are those zombies, so the zombies in The Walking Dead, are they high performance?
Actually, I really like the depiction of The Walking Dead because it suggests both. It suggests that a newly spawned zombie is very high performance. They don't have super strength or super abilities, but they're just very motivated and very capable and fast. But over time, they start to degrade. In that show, they discuss, or at least they describe, slow rotting and tissue degradation and associated reductions in capacity. The important thing is that unlike the supernatural depictions of zombies where you could have a skeleton running around, you still need brains and nervous systems and tissues and muscles to give you capacities. And as those things fail to repair, start to degrade with time, you would have a degradation of capacity. So I quite like The Walking Dead and its appreciation for that.
Great, great. Okay, here's one. This person says, thank you, Dr. Harris, for this interesting presentation. So do you think there's a possibility for this virus to exist? Is it just a matter of time for it to be discovered?
It's always good to be prepared. One of these situations that if a very uncommon occurrence does happen, it could have a very catastrophic effect. Do I know of anything that could relate to the zombie virus? Other than something like rabies, the phenomenon of rabies is actually very similar to what's been depicted in zombies. Never say never.
Right. So people get rabies, right? That's my question. You can
Absolutely.
Get to become rabid. Yeah. Okay. So here's a couple of questions came in about, so you mentioned, a shot to the head is the most effective, but can't we just drain most of their blood and that would also kill them?
Possibly, but if you follow that logic, if the metabolic demands for things like a cardiovascular system are reduced by 95%, then you'd need to drain 95% of the zombie's blood before it starts to even have an effect. So it's not a very effective way. What you need to do is separate the control system, the brain, from the output system, the body. That's the most efficient way to do it.
Excellent, excellent. Oh, here's one. Everybody wants to know this question. Can zombies have sex?
That's an interesting question. Certainly in some depictions, it would be possible. However, the idea of how do zombies reproduce is a different way of thinking about things. So it doesn't appear that zombies have sexual reproduction. You never see depictions of zombie reproduction per se. Recreational sex is another thing altogether. But with reproduction, the reproduction of zombies seems to be more like the reproduction of virus, where you have a infected host passing on the virus to a strong host that would then develop the capacity to pass on the virus again. So reproduction in zombies is very much like the reproduction in viruses, whereas sexual activity, not quite sure.
Along these lines, what do you estimate the lifespan of a healthy zombie to be?
Well, if one could predict that lifespan is proportional to metabolic rate, organisms with higher metabolic rates have lower lifespans. If you reduce the metabolic rates of a zombie, you extend its lifespan. So if a typical lifespan for a human might be 75 years, if you reduce the metabolic requirements of the zombie by 95%, you could have a zombie that could live for hundreds of years.
Wow. Okay, we have 5 more minutes here. How you doing there, Dr. Harris?
I'm good.
Okay, good. So let's see. Do you think there would ever be any science done toward making zombie humans or any other animal?
If the amygdala hijack hypothesis bears weight, and that's not actually a fictitious hypothesis, that's a real life hypothesis of understanding stress responses and autonomic function. But if you can uncouple the executive function of the prefrontal cortex, all of these signs and behaviors that are typical of zombies would manifest. So in that sense, yes, one could do it.
And then if there were to be a cure, do you think the zombie would remember their actions after they've been cured?
No, I don't. Well, there's two parts of that. Do I think there's a cure? I'm not quite sure if damaged tissue could regenerate to the same degree, especially tissue within the central nervous system, which tends not to regenerate after damage. So the damage that produces the zombie might not be reversible. One of the elements of amygdala hijack is compromising the ability to create short and long-term memory. So by that logic, if you can't consolidate short and long-term memory during the zombie state, you wouldn't have memories to remind you of that state if you did in fact find a cure.
Gotcha. So Dr. Harris, are you familiar with zombie ants?
Yes, that's a fantastic example. There are a number of examples. So toxoplasmosis infection is very similar like this. Zombie ants, the idea that a parasite of some sort takes over the nervous system of its host to change the behavior of the host to the advantage of the parasite. So with zombie ants, zombies are infected with a parasite, they change their behavior, they interact with other ants in different ways that promotes the reproduction of the parasite. With toxoplasmosis, you see shared hosts between mice and cats. A mouse that's infected with toxoplasmosis changes its behavior. It becomes active in the daylight. It becomes attracted to the smell of cat urine, allowing it to become consumed by a cat, passing on the infectious agent, the parasite, to the primary host, to the cat. So there are a number of examples in nature of a parasite changing the behavior of the host to the advantage of the parasite, and that's really what the zombie virus would do.
So here's another question. So can zombies starve to death? And do zombies have to drink water, or do they rely on metabolic water?
Very interesting question. So if zombies are primarily eating fat, fat actually produces a great deal of metabolic water and could meet the dietary requirements of the zombie very much like the dietary requirements for water are met in something like a kangaroo rat or a camel by fat metabolism. In terms of the starve to death, zombies would have to have a metabolism. It might be lower, they might require less fuel than the host human. However, there's still a metabolic requirement. The zombies would be compelled to feed, and that is probably nutritive.
Okay, we have like 2 minutes left. Are you tired yet?
I'm good.
Okay, so here's one. So you're trying to protect yourself from a zombie attack. Could you cover your scent, the smell of whatever you smell like, seen in movies, like smearing yourself with zombie guts? Because I'm assuming zombies don't eat one another. So could you mask your non-zombiness by taking zombie guts and smearing them all over yourself?
I think you could. I think that's a realistic portrayal. Could you consider that the zombie is taking in sensory information that's coming in through the thalamus, which is functional. It's going to be very much aware of some auditory stimuli, sounds, some olfactory stimuli. The olfactory system is peculiar in that it's the only sensory system that doesn't have a thalamic gateway. It goes straight into the midbrain without going through the thalamus. So if you could mask the stimuli that the zombie is cueing on to trigger those predatory behaviors, you could effectively hide. If you adopt the visual appearance of a zombie, the smell of a zombie, perhaps the sound of a zombie, you could probably hide, yes.
Okay, so that brings us to 8 o'clock. I think our next event is we're going to go to a Zoom chat, And then all the participants who want to chat more will actually be able to see each other in the screens, because we had it closed off to that because of the nature of how this thing was set up. So I want to thank Dr. Harris. I want to thank Dr. Kurt Bennett for our introduction, and Marianne for organizing this great event. And then there's a number of people behind the scenes that were doing all the technical stuff, and I'll thank them. And that's David and Jenna and Allie and Danny, and geez, I probably forgot some people anyways. So I will hopefully see everybody in the Zoom that you have a link to in the chat.
And before we go, I would also like to thank very much all of the staff and organizers that make this possible, as well as all of the audience. I believe we had at least 100 participants signed up for this. I'm not sure how many actually took part, because I don't have a running total. I see there are approximately 80 participants still involved here. So marvelous participation from the audience. Thank you all for coming. I very much appreciate it. I had a really enjoyable time.